Well, good evening and welcome everyone. My name's Lisa Schall and I'm a board member and the current program chair for the Portland chapter of the Native Plant Society of Oregon. The Native Plant Society of Oregon promotes enjoyment, study, and protection of Oregon's native plants, both Garry oak and Douglas fir. As part of our mission, we present a speaker each month on timely topics of interest to our members. I'd like to especially welcome any new members tonight, and I'd like to welcome any guest that we have tonight. Shortly, our speaker, Brance Morefield, is going to take us on a trip to the east side of the gorge. He will talk about the oak restoration and fire suppression. He will share the work that has been done through the U.S. Forest Service and the East Gorge Oak Partnership. Here we go. So after finishing college in Virginia, Brance left the East Coast in 2001 to work in Oregon and Washington as a U.S. Forest Service botanist. He worked for the next 20 years in every Region 6 national forest in Oregon, Washington, and most of Northern California, collecting important botanical data. He ultimately became a USFS botanist and invasive plant coordinator for the Columbia River Gorge National Scenic Area in 2023. He is currently in that position and working out of the Hood River office. Along with his official duties with the USFS, he now applies his knowledge and experience to restoration and conservation work in the gorge. He has especially become involved with the East Cascades Oak Partnership. We know him as the keeper of the keys around NPSO because he holds the keys to some of our favorite botanical hideaways. Welcome, Brance. And Brance, what was your reaction to some of those answers to your introductory questions?
Well, that was pretty good. I guess I'm not going to disappoint anybody when I go through my presentation. So that's good. Well, thanks for having me, everybody. Good to see all of you that I can see. I'm going to start sharing. I'm going to say if you can optimize your screen to make it as big as possible, it's pretty slide heavy. So there's going to be a lot to look at in these slides. And so give me a second and I'll pull it up.
And while he's sharing his screen, he is going to have some work for you guys to do. So have a piece of paper and pen handy. Interactive display. You will even smell the smoke.
All right, thanks for the introduction. So through my slideshow, I have, there will be photos of plants, and each plant has a number associated with it. There's not one in each slide. What I want you to do is for each number, write down which plant you think it is. And this is the first one here, so you can see the number in the upper left side. So some of them will disappear a little bit quick, so you got to be on it. All right. So in 2002, I was hired by the U.S. Forest Service Pacific Northwest Research Station as a botanist to collect forest inventory and analysis data in Oregon, Washington, and California. And it's funny because that still feels like yesterday. I was 25 years old. We collected forest biometrics on a honeycomb grid composed of 6,000 acre hexagons. In each of those hexagons, we collected tree species, DBH, height, age, insect and disease damage, understory vegetation, fuels composition, and forest history over a 2.5 acre area that would represent the 6,000 acres. Here you can see those areas represented by the white dot within the 6,000 acre hexagon. Every 10 years, we would go back to the same place and remeasure using the exact same protocol to measure change over time. This map isn't to scale and is just for context. We were required to determine forest history by observing disturbance across the landscape, looking at fuel loading, and by coring trees. Coring trees must be one of the most interesting parts of forest biometrics. You get to look inside a tree to learn how old it is and see how healthy it is. So here on the right side of your screen, you can see the inside of a tree. This is a tree core. And on the left side of your screen, you can see the outside of the tree. And then right over here, you can see what we call the early wood, which is a collection of larger cells. It's a little bit lighter color. Those are formed in the early part of the year. And then in the later part of the year, you get these smaller cells. And so it makes it look darker. And that's what makes up a whole year's growth. And in this slide in particular, you can see in the beginning of this tree's life, the years were pretty thick. And then at some point, it slowed down. And typically what happens in a situation like that is its neighbors grow up along with it, and then they start crowding each other in. And then as you come down about 30 more years, you can see right here where it opened up and released a little bit. And typically that's some type of disturbance. Something happened to one of its neighbors, and then this tree started growing better. So now looking back at that time, they were teaching me to be a forest detective. Let's see. Here you can see lots of forest disturbance. Logging, where you can see these bare patches right here. You can see a nice contiguous forest of green. And then over here on the left, you can see the remnants of the Eagle Creek fire. And then also to the far right over here, you can see an urban area, which is Hood River. In 2023, I was hired as the botanist at the Columbia River Gorge National Scenic Area. And that was huge for me. I was tired of traveling across the region and just wanted to sit still for a while. My experience in all the different forests and types of disturbance and succession related to those disturbances shaped me, and it gave me the ability to read the forest. And now it was time to move on. Here's a bit of detail about the Columbia River Gorge National Scenic Area. Created in 1986, it's composed of 293,000 acres of mixed ownership, private, county, state, tribal, and federal. So you can imagine the complexities, but also the necessity for cooperation. Most importantly, and I feel this is often overlooked, the Columbia River Gorge National Scenic Area is actually a national forest of its own. It's not the Mount Hood, it's not the Gifford Pinchot. 85,000 of the 290,000 acres are U.S. Forest Service lands. 35,000 acres are wilderness. So really, we only have 50,000 acres of land we can actively manage. We generally only passively manage wilderness, except for letting fires burn and keeping weeds under control. And this area covers 85 miles of the Columbia River, from the Sandy River to the Deschutes River. Pretty quickly after I arrived at the scenic area, we started a journey to plan the work we would be doing for at least the next 10 years. The project area covered all lands east of Hood River, Oregon, and White Salmon, Washington, on the Oregon and Washington sides of the Columbia, somewhere around 30,000 acres. This was a great opportunity. I get to use my experience to inform prescriptions for management, and then we actually get to implement the work. The first thing we did was divide the area up into vegetation types. Then we created a grid of plots, 1/4 acre plot per 20 acres in every vegetation type. That was a lot of plots to measure. We didn't need to measure them all, but we needed to get an idea for what was out there. We have 4 main vegetation types for this project: conifer, conifer oak, oak, and grassland. Measuring these plots was an amazing experience for me. I was out measuring vegetation to inform next steps in restoring the land. So here you can see some of the polygons which represent the vegetation types. This big one here, this lighter yellow, is grassland. And then these red areas are reserved areas that we're not going to do any work. And then you can see oak woodland here. And then you can also see our plot locations. And in this slide in particular, the ones that are in red, we already went to, and the ones that are in green, we hadn't gone to yet. Because of my previous experience, I could walk into a forest, take a quick look, and assess some form of treatment, from thinning trees to reduce densities to removing weeds or reintroducing fire. Here's a great example of an overstocked stand, a stand with way too many stems to support a healthy forest. This forest used to be composed of just oak and pine. Now we have Douglas fir encroachment shading out the oaks and stressing the pine. Thinning to reduce the number of stems, piling the material, and then burning the understory would be a great prescription to get this back to a healthy oak and pine stand. So when you look at this photo, you can see the Oregon white oak usually has a little more moss on the stem. So there's one, there's one, there's one, and there's one, but then the rest are mostly Douglas fir. So here's a post-treatment snapshot of the previous stand where we removed 30 trees from this quarter-acre patch. The oaks will respond well to this release. They will have more available moisture and nutrients from the soil. Their crowns will expand, and the understory will slowly come back. Just to give you an idea of what pile burning looks like after thinning, these are piles right here that we hand piled. And then you can see this big oak. And then still we have a lot of large diameter Douglas fir. This is an example of a low intensity prescribed fire in pine and oak, and hopefully it'll play, and give it a good listen because it has a nice crackle. So I'm just going to let this play through. I don't know if you could hear it, but I love to hear that crackle. After we use fire to restore these systems, we will plant and seed with appropriate native species to reestablish understory vegetation, typically focusing on native grasses and forbs. Friends of the Gorge made this video for us to help explain some of the work we are doing out there because I find that a lot of people just don't know. So I'm going to play this short video. It has captions if you can't hear it, but hopefully you can hear it. Hey Gorge friends, it's Brance. We're out here at Legacy Pines today. I wanted to show you something. So we're out here. We have 300, 400, 500-year-old ponderosa pine, Douglas fir, even Oregon white oaks that are, in the 100 years old. But this is one of those places that has a fire. And this the last one I found was 6 years ago. And we need to bring fire back in here. But one of the repercussions of not having fire is that the Douglas fir have encroached. And when the Douglas fir encroach, they start killing out the things we like, for example, ponderosa pine and Oregon white oak, because they're not shade tolerant. So Douglas fir comes in and shades them out and lets them kill them. So we're here today doing some thinning the last 8-year period. How old do you think those trees are out there? But here you can see 100, 200, 300, and then 371 years old, and that's not even as big as this tree right here. So this isn't from this tree. This is from one down there, but look at how big this is. So I have to believe that this tree is at least 500 years old. So what we're going to do is open all this up. We're going to cut out all the Douglas fir, open this up, Oregon white oak, nice pounds. Will hopefully expand the spaces, and then the ponderosa pines will become the large overstory. So if you look behind us here, you can see one of those 400-year-old ponderosas that was here before the Douglas fir. So as we're coming in this area, you can see there's a bunch of pines, and that's all Douglas fir material. And so if you can imagine, look back over there, this area is untreated from over here. And this is how much material we put out. And then next year we'll burn all these pines. Well, I hope you could hear that. I don't know if you could. And I just want to let you know that no large diameter Douglas fir were cut, or ponderosa pine or Oregon white oak. So don't be alarmed. As I was walking the forest, I started compiling tree ages, disturbance records, and mapping out large-scale disturbance. I was pulling heavily on my FIA experience to assess all these areas and searching for previous documentation by my predecessors to determine what had already been done. I was seeing lots of evidence of treatments as I walked. There were stumps, fire scars on the trees, old roads, fences, old house foundations. I could see there had been heavy human influence recently and in the past. I was also seeing something very concerning. I was seeing lots of large dead oak trees in the conifer forests. What did it mean? What happened to all these trees? This made me start digging into historic photos and references. I was able to dig up the 1935 aerial imagery collected by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers before the Bonneville Dam was built. This imagery has given me the greatest amount of insight and an accurate look into the past. From studying this imagery, I can infer so many things like fire history, logging history, human impacts, encroachment severity, stand ages. I will come back to this a little bit more later in some detail. One of the most important documents I found while I was digging was a planning document from the early 2000s, explaining the history of the scenic area until now. In the late 80s, the U.S. Forest Service Columbia River Gorge National Scenic Area started a 20-year-long evaluation of the 85,000 Forest Service acres to determine restoration priorities. During this process, oak habitats in the eastern Columbia River Gorge stood out due to extensive biodiversity, departure from prehistoric fire regimes, and proximity to urban interface. Another important factor not assessed at that time was resilience to climate change. This is becoming more important as we are feeling the direct effects of changing climate. Land conversion and historic fire suppression has contributed to about 50% loss of Oregon white oak habitat in the gorge. So why is Oregon white oak so important? It's biodiversity. Biodiversity needs protection because as humans develop more land, the availability of habitat is increasingly lost. It is a keystone species, which means it impacts its ecosystem by supporting a huge amount of biodiversity. White oak hosts over 400 caterpillar species. These caterpillars are food for many birds, mammals, insects, reptiles, and amphibians. Associated species like Douglas fir and ponderosa pine only host around 100 caterpillar species each. Here you can see a dense stand of Douglas fir, grand fir, and ponderosa pine. There are very few plants in the understory, with a small amount of moss and lichen. This contrast from the previous slide speaks to the lack of diversity and abundance in these types of forests in comparison to the Oregon white oak stands. Imagine how many pollinators are buzzing around those balsam root right now. Here are some examples of species supported by Oregon white oak. Lewis's woodpecker on the left, black-capped chickadee on the top right, and our scrub jay. The western gray squirrel and northern deer mouse, this alligator lizard and chorus frog. Understanding prehistoric fire regimes helps us understand what shaped Oregon white oak habitat. We know from dendroecology and ethnographies, low-intensity fires were common prior to European American colonization. Post-colonization, indigenous burning was suppressed, and the repercussions of fire suppression we are still trying to understand. We know fire suppression has had negative effects on the ecosystem function, like accumulation of fuels that increase risk of high-severity fire, decrease biodiversity by creating homogeneous composition in the overstory and understory, and allow for conifer encroachment in fire-adapted habitats. Before the westward movement of European Americans, the fire return interval for the east side forests of the Scenic area would have been about every 3 to 6 years of low-intensity fire intentionally started by indigenous people. These were culturally informed fires that supported indigenous ways. These low-intensity fires would have selected for the shade-intolerant, fire-resistant Oregon white oak and ponderosa pine and supported an open, healthy forest. Now our fires are spotty, higher severity, and very inconsistent. I will say the gorge has seen a lot of small fires that have helped maintain some of our priority habitat, but not like before. Here you can see the Eagle Creek fire. It burned in 1902 in a similar footprint, which I always find interesting because if it burned in 1902 and then it regenerated back to look like what it did in 2016 before it burned again, that would be amazing. We can better understand when previous fires occurred by collecting tree cores or tree cross sections to study when fires would have come through, as indicated by fire scars. Here you can see this tree was growing well at the beginning of its life in the center. So right in here has wider growth rings. But something caused its growth to slow, as indicated by the tighter rings as they move outside. This tree, along with most of its neighbors, are 150 years old, which indicates there was a stand replacing fire in 1876. When you find trees in a forest with the same age, there had to be a stand-wide disturbance. Here's an example of a fire-scarred oak that is healed over. So right here, this dark mark along the edge, that's actually the fire scar where it killed the cambium of the tree. And then what happened, you have these lobes on the left and right side. They healed over until they became continuous growth rings again right here. And then it continued its growth up until today. How does fire suppression degrade Oregon white oak habitat? Well, that's a good question. Oregon white oak is a fire-dependent species. It needs fire to reduce opportunistic Douglas fir from vigorously growing to shade out the oaks. This is what we call Douglas fir encroachment. They also need fire to prepare the seed bed for new acorns and kill off acorn weevils. Here is an Oregon white oak forest that has not seen fire in over 100 years. The stand is very dense and is at risk of experiencing high intensity, high severity fire due to the buildup of fuels. The health of this forest is also reduced due to the competition for resources. Here's the opposite view of what you just saw, literally across the road. This is an Oregon white oak woodland treated with conifer removal and was burned in 2016 with prescribed fire, and then again in 2025 in the Burgoyne fire in Washington. This looks really great to me from my perspective because it is less dense and there are openings allowing for more sunlight for understory plants, which increase biodiversity. So let's dig into Douglas fir encroachment. How do we know we are seeing encroachment? Well, we have aerial imagery and tree core data that I spoke about earlier. Aerial imagery was taken in 1935. These images span from the Deschutes River all the way to Portland. This is satellite imagery from 2024. Focus on the area within the circle. What happens if we do nothing? Because of humans' impact on the ecosystem, doing nothing is actually doing something and creating a disturbance shift. Long-term disturbance versus short-term maintenance disturbance to maintain the climax communities. This is the 1935 imagery. The circle is composed of mostly Oregon white oak, probably 95%. You can see some trees form shadows, which down here in the lower portion, right here, these are a few conifers throughout the Oregon white oak. So it looks like in this photo, the conifers compose about 2% of the canopy. After I saw this image, I went to confirm my suspicion, and I was correct. There were dead oaks overtopped by conifers. In this photo, the oak trees are only about 70 years old, which indicates some landscape scale disturbance in 1865, like a fire. I'm going to do a little back and forth so you can have a look at how it changed. I'll do this a couple times so we can just get a good idea. Actually, in this photo, the places where the oaks still exist are kind of on the periphery. Right in here, there's a patch right in there, but not much oak. Now let's go back. So look at that change. That's a huge change in just 90 years. I can't believe it. And then this big swath is the power line right of way, the BPA right of way. Here's an area with more grassland and stringers of oak in the 1935 imagery. So I'm going to go forward to 2024. Where did all the oaks go? Let's go back. So the the conifers encroached into the grassland and also into the oaks. That's pretty amazing and stark change. Here you can see the patchwork of ownership in the gorge. Wildland-urban interface, WUI, refers to the area where human development, such as houses and communities, meets or intermingles with undeveloped wildland vegetation. You can see a lot of the area is intermixed, meaning it has human development mixed with undeveloped wildland vegetation. So it's easy to understand why we want to do fuels reduction treatments in these areas. There's a high risk of fire in these dry east side forests because of fire suppression, which has allowed fuels to build up, and they are dry due to low annual precipitation. Land conversion is easy to understand. Humans came, saw the oaks, and decided the land they occupied would be better for grazing and farming. So they cut the oaks down or left the oaks, but the grazing inhibited regeneration of new plants. Here's a great example of an area near McCall Point in Oregon, where oaks were removed to create grassland for grazing. This area was cut before 1935 and it has not regenerated back to oak yet. The little dots that you're seeing out here appear to be ponderosa pine moving into the open area, but the oaks don't seem to be moving in there. I don't want to talk about climate change too much, but we know Oregon white oak are well adapted to a warmer, hotter climate because of their waxy leaves that protect from intense heat, ability to close stomata when it gets too hot, and ability to survive fire. Douglas fir, on the other hand, are not very good at closing their stomata, and so they continue to pull moisture from the ground even in the hottest weather, reducing soil moisture for other plants and animals. Here's a picture of clonal oak clumps. This is a phenomenon you see often in the gorge. These trees share the same root system and resprouted after multiple fires. These trees could be thousands of years old, not the tops, but the roots. Starting in 2004, from that early planning, the U.S. Forest Service started treating the acres we just spoke about. We started doing the work to reduce fuel loading and increase forest health, just like all the treatments I've spoken about. So I can only imagine what these areas would have looked like after a fire had we not done these treatments. Maybe it'd look like this. In the Burgoyne Fire and the Rowena fires of 2025, Forest Service lands experienced less than 10% high severity fire effects over thousands of acres. I think that's pretty amazing. These fires were in the summer when it was dry and we had high wind events. There's still one more treatment I have not mentioned as an oak restoration treatment. And this one treatment gets a lot of attention and often doesn't occur because of the potential negative effects if done incorrectly. Oak thinning. Oak thinning is removing some of the oak stems in order to improve the vigor of the other trees. When I thin oaks, it is in stands similar to this one in the photo, where I will remove the trees that are being shaded by more vigorous trees. I like to think, what would a low intensity fire do in this stand? And try to mimic that. A low intensity fire would generally top kill the smaller diameter trees because they have not developed the thick bark necessary to resist fire. When thinning oaks, wind dominant wind direction and aspect are two major factors that can contribute to a failed treatment. In the gorge, if a southwest facing slope is thinned, due to the predominant west wind and sun exposure, the oak trees could experience enough stress to kill the oaks. So care must be taken when choosing this method. This will not be the last time we do work in these forests. These acres need to be treated and treated again, and fire is the best way to do that. The next time you're at Catherine Creek or Coyote Wall, as you look across the landscape, think, what would this look like if nothing had been done to restore this white oak habitat? Commonly, we think of fire as the disturbance, but I contend the lack of fire is the greatest disturbance in these fire-adapted ecosystems. Doing nothing is having negative effects on these systems. You will see the Forest Service, along with its partners, continue to work to treat these acres in support of healthy ecosystems. If you want to find out more about Oregon white oak restoration in the gorge, visit the East Cascades Oak Partnership website. And also, if you see an oak growing in an odd place, record it on iNaturalist so we can have a record of the occurrence. Okay, and now for the finale, here are the answers to the quiz. So check your answers against mine. I'll leave this up, but that is the end of my slideshow. I'm going to leave that slide up for a little while.
That was awesome. Your speech was so engaging, though. I kept forgetting to look for the numbers and the flowers.
Yeah, the double grass widow was an interesting one.
I think Don Jacobson found one of those this year, too.
Oh, cool. There's a spot across from Dog Mountain across the railroad tracks that has a few of them.
Oh, he found, I think, maybe the white one, not the double one.
Oh, okay. Yep.
Are you ready for any questions?
I'll take any questions.
Okay,
Fire away.
well, all right. I think some of the first ones had to do with where do you get your seeds? for
So
restoration.
yeah, so when I first came to the gorge, the Mount Hood was supplying me with a lot of the seed that they collected because they had been getting it grown out. So they would do seed collection and then they would send it off to Benson Farms, and Benson Farms would grow it out for them and store it. Um, and then, yeah, so Benson Farms is one of our huge suppliers of seeds.
And that's on the east side?
Yep, that's up in Moses Lake in Washington. Yeah.
Okay. Because I know our Humble Roots friends always remind us to keep the west on the west and the east on the
Oh
east.
yeah, yeah. And we get lots of stuff from Humble Roots whenever we can. They're a huge partner. They do a lot of great work in the gorge. So
Okay. Well, we have, of course, questions about did I miss number 6 or did I miss this?
yeah.
uh, okay. Another question has to do with how much has the Douglas fir range increased as a result of the timber industry?
That's a good question. I mean, we know that I can't speak to that, but we know that they were cutting down ponderosa pine and then planting Douglas fir back. So that would be a little bit of some research to be done, and I bet it varies regionally because Douglas fir is more valuable timber than ponderosa pine, at least at this point.
Yeah. And if oak, well, you at one point you mentioned oak as being the climax, but I always thought that it was some kind of conifer that was the climax, and especially over on the west side where it could be assumed to be Douglas fir.
Yeah, and I think that in order to have Oregon white oak as the climax, you have to have the fire as the maintenance disturbance that occurs. So on the west side, you may get 30-year to 100-year events in the Douglas fir and hemlock. Um, but yeah, you definitely need the disturbance to maintain the Oregon white oak. But it's not that stand replacing disturbance, it's the low intensity fire.
Right, right. Uh, so next one, if you thin the oaks, don't they just resprout at the base and come up more bushy, at least
That's
at
a
first?
Yeah, that's a great observation. And sometimes that does happen, but so if you thin the oaks that are in the shade already, like they're already not as vigorous as the ones that are in the canopy. So those ones do resprout, but they're not as likely to do much because they're in the shade and Oregon white oak don't really like shade. So if you can keep that in your pocket when you're thinking about thinning oaks, then you'll be more successful.
Okay. Uh, just lots of good kudos. Fantastic info and gorgeous photos. Um, Here's one um, that I had kind of brought up with you earlier. Are the oaks that had their leaves killed from the fires going to survive?
Um, well, I think that we have, so I, I guess there are differing views on this because I remember right after the Burgoyne fire, um, there were a lot of the leaves that were still on the trees, but they were scorched. So they weren't charred, they weren't black, but they were still brown and crisp on the tree. And I remember seeing just a little bit back on those same branches, there was green new resprout. And so I think they're going to come back, but I think we're all going to find out here pretty soon.
Right, and I think that I had read somewhere that if there were leaves still there, that that part was dead, but if there weren't leaves, that part will re-sprout. So who knows? Like you said, you have an
Yeah,
experiment going.
we have a great experiment that we can all observe together.
Next one. What is the current greatest resource need for doing restoration like this?
I think I mean, I would say informing the public that it actually needs to happen and how important these oaks are. So really just education. And then another thing I would say about the scenic area in particular, a lot of the places we have large conifers that have come in. Maybe they're, 60 to 90 years old and they're 30 inches. And when you go removing a tree like that to save, a 10-inch Oregon white oak, people don't tend to like the idea of that. Um, but I always like to think that I'm doing restoration on the 100-year timeline. I may not see these oaks come back now, but if we continue this work, then in 100 years, we may have this back to something that's amazing.
Yeah. And so other than knowledge, second part of that was, what do you wish there was more of? So how might that knowledge
I wish
get up? Or
I wish there was more money for doing restoration.
there you go.
I wish we had all the money. We could get a lot done.
Uh, is there anything being done about conserving the Arctostaphylos diversity in the gorge?
Um, that's interesting. I only know of Arctostaphylos columbiana and Arctostaphylos uva-ursi. We may have, I don't know that we have nevadensis, but I do know of some really amazing patches. And just the other day, somebody asked me, "Hey, Brance, are we planting Arctostaphylos at our restoration sites?" And I was like, "Not yet." So, not much yet, but thanks. That's a great question, and keep bringing it up.
Okay, sounds good. What other factors can contribute to poor results after the thinning oaks besides the aspect as you mentioned?
Can you repeat that? Sorry.
Um, what other factors can contribute to poor results after the thinning of the oaks, other than just the aspect? Like you said, Southwest is
Yeah,
not a good aspect.
I think that there's, when if you thin them out too far and also you're exposing the soil around those trees to more sun than they're used to, I think that's a major factor. Let's see, wind, sun, those are the major factors that I can think of. Oh, yeah,
And what
that's all I
about
can come up with.
invasives moving in?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, invasives are always a problem. Not to, yeah, that's definitely an issue.
And how do you deal with that in some of these areas that you've opened up?
Yeah, so I feel personally that we've done very poorly, the Forest Service, in taking care of that problem. But I'm hoping moving forward that we're going to pre-treat the areas that have infestations before we do any work in there, and then continue the treatments through the piling, the thinning, the piling, and then the burning, and then post treatments. Because, like I always say, there's no rest in restoration, so this work always has to continue.
Very true. Um, okay, speaking of out of place oaks, I'm from Southern California where we have lots of live oaks. And this person saw a very odd occurrence of a tree that they believe to be another live oak at Dalton Lake Nature Preserve in St. Helens in Columbia County.
Hmm.
I was going to say, that's Brianna's question.
Yeah, I wouldn't know what that could be. It'd be interesting if it was all the way up here. But there's a lot of human factors over there, so.
Right. So, um, okay, here's one from one of your friends out there, Kristen Curran. Have you seen any increases in pine beetles in areas with thinning treatments? Increases or decreases?
Um, so Well, that might put me on a little bit of a tangent, but so the first thing I'll say is in ponderosa pine, I feel like their distribution is increasing as you go east too, and there wouldn't have been as many as as many as we have right now. But poor the time to thin pine, if you're gonna thin pine, is October to December generally, because of the Ips beetles that are gonna, yeah, create multiple generations. So yeah, we did notice from a failed thinning that we killed a bunch of ponderosa pine trees because we thinned at the wrong time. But in the place where we're doing just Douglas fir removal, I haven't really noticed um, any beetle increase. And typically, I mean, if you lay a Douglas fir down, you're going to get beetles coming in to kill it, but I haven't seen them attacking the surrounding Douglas fir.
And the beetles are also indicative of the lack of fire, right? The fire suppression, and then also the climate change, right?
Yep. Yeah, I would say so.
Okay. Oh, here's another Arctostaphylos. That there's Arctostaphylos patula up the Hood River Valley,
Oh, I
and
can see that.
reported on actually both sides.
Oh, cool. Good
And
to
then,
know.
yes, there is the Arctostaphylos media too, which is the hybrid, like the native hybrid.
That's weird. In the gorge?
No, in the
Sorry.
Cascades.
Oh, okay. I was just making the joke that it feels like everything in the gorge hybridizes.
Well, yeah, like you said, it's its own national forest.
That's right.
Um, you're saying that in the absence of humans, oak stands can naturally stay homogeneous due to natural low intensity fire, but that
Mhm.
nowadays there aren't enough of those kinds of fires to keep the oak stands healthy.
No, what I was saying was the indigenous peoples have been part of this ecosystem for over 10,000 years, and they were definitely helping keep the oaks around with indigenous burning.
So, what happened before that?
You mean 16,000 years ago?
Yeah.
I'm not certain.
Okay. Again, back to what can we do to help? Outreach to the public, very important about
Yeah.
these various practices. Okay. Here's a shout out hello from Hannah Kinville. Uh, which invasive species are the greatest concern in the gorge?
I think all of our invasive annual grasses, cheatgrass, the Bromus genus, those are all really annoying and ubiquitous through the gorge. Skeleton weed is becoming even worse. Um, oh yeah, we have Medusa head and Ventonata grass. I feel like you name it, we got it.
Uh, Maddie Pie asked why, wait, why did thinning at the wrong time kill the ponderosas?
Yeah, because what it does is so if you sever a okay, so if you cut down a ponderosa pine, then you're basically taking its ability to fight off the beetles away. And so then the beetles can move in, use it as a food source, and then they can create new generations. And then because it's such a big population, they're able to attack live trees.
Okay, that makes sense. There's a great book out there called Trees in Trouble, written by Daniel Matthews. And
Okay.
we're going to have him on later in the fall, but I think he has another topic for us. But that's a great book
Awesome.
about this whole situation. Besides invasive grasses, this is from Paul Slichter. Besides invasive grasses that are rampant, like you mentioned, the medusa and the cheatgrass, rush skeleton weed seems to be becoming a big problem. So he agrees with you about the skeleton weed.
It is. Yeah, we're going to start some in our East Side Forest Health Project. We're going to start focusing on skeleton weed and see if we can make some movement on it.
Is there a condition in the soils that is causing it to move in, or is it more climatic, or do you know?
The skeleton weed,
Yeah.
it seems to like those dry East Side grasslands, and it produces a lot of seeds, and it doesn't seem to go away. I don't know. It's just really good at being bad. Doesn't
Do you
have
know
a
others
predator.
like that?
I did hear sheep like to eat it, but I haven't tested that hypothesis yet.
Yeah, just like you have to find the right Spanish goats to eat Scotch broom.
Oh boy.
Um, okay, Larry Teeter asks, is there genetic evidence of Gary oak differences by region?
I can't answer that question.
Okay, Mart Hughes, talk to him. Rachel asks, is your funding to do this work stable right now?
I would say no, but I want to give a shout out to East Cascades Oak Partnership because they are working with OWEB, Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, to get funds to do oak restoration in the gorge. And they have, yeah, they're a huge component of how we get most of our work done. Without them, this administration isn't giving us, anyway, I should probably shut up. But yeah, East Cascades Oak Partnership.
Right. Diddly squat is what came to mind.
Yeah.
Uh, Um, okay, Lisa Apple asks or states the last major glacial period ended about 11,700 years ago, which would have had a major impact on the plant community types when we were talking about previous to the natives coming. I'm not entirely familiar with what was happening when it was this region of the country, but the ice sheets would have been relatively close. So as far as those plant communities that came after the ice sheets, I guess is what the question or statement is about.
Yeah, and I
More
think that, as
paleo
those, well, there are books that address the movement of oaks during the last glacial period. I'm trying to remember this book that I have, but it talks about the movement of plants in the forests in North America, and it's really interesting. Anyway, I can't think of it now, but it speaks to that directly.
okay, great. Um, uh, so sorry, I was just thinking about what 16,000 vegetation types. But again, that paleobotany work that is still happening, and yeah. Okay, and then Maddie also wants you to share the book name if it comes to you. Sounds
I'll,
cool.
yep, I'll send it on over.
Um, so thinking of this is my question, Lisa's question. Um, and I say if I ever find a graduate student who wants a good project, this is it. In going from oak prairie to oak savanna to oak woodland, okay, and the associated plant species, is is there a function that we humans are ignoring for poison oak?
Is this like the mosquito question?
Yes.
I don't know that I can answer that one, but I could think of some fun answers.
Well, no, I mean, I've always thought of it that it must be, like Scotch broom, right? It fixes nitrogen. I mean, it has a purpose, right? I mean, so
Well, I
I'm just
mean,
thinking that, or if, is there, now that we're looking at underground relationships, or just, is there something maybe that poison oak does? And so it does help the oaks thrive.
yeah, that's a great question. And if you do get a grad student, I'll help. But they do have a lot of pollinators though. Poison oak.
Yeah, they feed the
I always see
birds.
them full with pollinators. I'm sure there's some mycorrhizal component. I'm not sure though.
Okay. Well, let's see. I have run to the end of my list and it's 8 o'clock. So I
And
think that,
somebody
um,
dropped the name of the book in there, America's Ancient Forest. That's the
oh,
one.
that is the name of the book. Okay. America's Ancient Forests. Very good. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah,
Uh,
and
Very
Millen
thought provoking.
McCord, be in touch. I can put my email in the chat.